Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us for yet another edition of Succession Management and Institution Building on Amogate Radio Communications. My name is Tolu Omodara, and it's such a joy, such a delight to have you with us on the program today. Hope you've had a wonderful week so far, a wonderful month, and a wonderful year. Gradually, we've come to the end of January. Hope it's been a beautiful month for you, and we wish you a greater rest of the year. So, we've been looking at the issue of succession management and institution building, and we're attempting to answer 4 fundamental questions in the course of this program. The first one, what is succession management? The second one, what are institutions? The third one, why do we need to build an institution? Why bother building an institution, right? Why can't I just have an organization that is not necessarily an institution? Why have an institution? Is it important to institutionalize things? Right? And finally, can institutions be built without effective succession management? Those are the 4 questions we've been camping around thus far. Now, we looked at succession management in the first episode, and one of the things we said, we narrowed down on what we call the 3 Ds, right? The 3 Ds of succession management. You need to, 1, discover potential talent, potential leaders, potential successors, those who can hopefully take over when the time comes. Number 2, you need to develop them ahead. We emphasize the fact that succession does not just happen. You have to plan for effective succession. If you do not plan effectively for succession, you will not have the right people at the right place at the right time. For you to have the right people at the right place at the right time in an organization, it means that you have been foreseeing the need and preparing ahead for the need. So 1, you have to discover the potential talent, the potential successors. 2, you have to develop them, because they are potential talents. They are typically not ready to be deployed immediately. And when you have developed them, of course, you have to deploy them to increasingly higher levels of responsibility, which is also a part of their development. So succession management can be captured in those 3 Ds: the discovery, the development, and the deployment of potential talent, potential leaders. And then we zoomed in a little bit more on the question of what are institutions in last week's episode, which was the second episode. We talked about institutions, and one key word that stood out, which we are going to focus on a lot today, is the word structure. Structure. We gave the example of an organization we once worked for, many, and it's not only one, there have been many organizations we've seen like that, where several things are built around one individual. Typically, the person probably began the organization, but the question is, can the organization outlast the person? And I'm not just talking about the person dying. If the person, goes on to higher responsibilities, like the example of Bill Gates, which we gave, right? Will the organization be able to function without that person? If you have not intentionally built an institution, if you have not intentionally built a structure, if you have not effectively built a structure that is, that goes beyond whoever it was that envisioned the organization, you may not be able to have an organization that can outlast the visionary. And that was why we also described an institution as organization with enduring capacity. We asked the question, what are institutions? And one of the definitions we gave is that institutions are organizations with enduring capacity, organizations that can outlast whoever it was that began them. And that sort of answers the question of why build institutions. You want to build an institution so that you have something that outlasts you. You want to build an institution so that you have something that goes on far into the future. During the course of preparing for these programs, these episodes thus far, it's been interesting to see organizations that are 175 years old, 120 years old, 150 years old, and so on and so forth. But none of these things happened circumstantially. That's one thing we've seen thus far. Each of these organizations that have, outlasted their visionaries were intentionally developed to succeed and to be sustained. I'll say that again. Each of these organizations that outlasted their visionaries and have lasted and have stayed, these organizations with staying power, each of them was intentionally developed, was intentionally, fine-tuned, was intentionally, so to say, woven to succeed and to be sustained. To succeed and to be sustained. Last week, we talked about how stability is the foundation for speed, right? But this week, we want to look at that structure, right? How structure provides staying power, staying capacity, staying power. Institutions can be described as organizations with staying power, but that staying power comes a lot from structure. And that word structure is one word we want to, dwell a little bit on today. How exactly do we build structure? Some very simple things, right? But we are going to introduce an element we hinted at last week, which is the element of culture. Because structure can be peripheral. Let me explain what I mean by that. Superficial, if you're not careful. If you're not careful, it can just be something written. It can be a document. It can be a chart. If it is not backed up with culture. Last week we said we're going to, speak a little bit more to the culture. But let's even, expand on the structure. Then we begin to complement it with the necessary part of culture. So let's talk about structure. Now, when you talk about structure, you are talking about well-defined and articulated roles. Last week we gave the example of an organization where you have one head with many hands and feet. In other words, everything is built around one individual and nobody is actually functioning independently. Now, don't get me wrong, there is a place for interdependence. That's not the kind of independence that we are, so to say, critiquing here. That's not the kind of codependence, beg your pardon, that we are critiquing here. Codependence, the kind of codependence we are critiquing here is where, people are not allowed to function in true interdependence, but they are only functioning codependently. And I'll quickly break the two or separate the two. So if we are functioning interdependently, we are operating as the body, the human body. Think about the human body. Can the hand ever play the role of the leg? All things being equal, ceteris paribus, like economists will say. Or can the nose ever play the function of the knee? In reality, you have an optimally functioning body when each part is playing its role. Anytime you think about a structure, you must envision an organization where the roles are well defined and delineated, to be honest. I'll say that again. Anytime you think about the kind of structure that lays the foundation for an institution, you are talking about an organization with clearly defined roles. As simple as it is, the clear delineation of roles lays part of the foundation for structural stability, for the stability that comes from structure. So if I have my role that I'm playing and it is defined, it is delineated, right? When I am not there as a person, because that role has been defined, anyone can take that description. Sometimes it's called job description. Anyone can take that job description, right, and see if they can fill that role based on the delineation, based on the definition, based on the description. And once the right person can be found to fit that description, then that role can continue to function optimally. In that context, or when we've achieved that level of institutional stability, that role is not necessarily about me as an individual, but about the organization. I hope you're following me very carefully here. When you begin to build an organization outside of individuals, or when you begin to build an organization in the way that individuals can contribute their best, but the organization is not stalled because we don't have an individual. When you get to that level, you are beginning to create an institution. So it is very, very important, as simple as it is very important that we have structure in order to lay the foundation for institutions. And one of the simple things we need to do to have structure is to have clearly delineated roles. Complementary roles, yes, but they are also clearly delineated because you have each part functioning such that together we have a whole, such that holistically we have an optimally functioning organization. Now, what are institutions? Again, institutions are organizations with enduring capacity, organizations that can outlast whoever it was that built them. How do we achieve this? How do we attain this level of institutionalization? How does an organization become an institution? Structure is very important. How do we build that structure? Clear delineation of roles, very, very important. But if you have it on paper, but you don't have a culture, and this is where leadership still comes in, you don't have a culture that supports each role functioning and playing its optimal part, then you may still only have a chart. You may not truly have a structure, right? Now, again, you may be at different levels as you're listening to me as an organization. Some organizations may have very strong structures where each part, functions separately, and that's not their challenge. Their own challenge is this level of structural stability has actually gotten to a point where there's a tendency for it to inhibit innovation. And I tried to address that concern last week, that sometimes people get concerned that too much structure, too much stability can lead to an inhibition of innovation, right? Can inhibit innovation, can, kind of frustrate innovation, can limit creativity. And I remember saying that not necessarily. You just have to build the culture where the structure becomes the foundation for innovation. In other words, the stability becomes the basis for speed. And I remember giving the analogy that try flying or try soaring, try speeding when you have 3 tires instead of 4 tires underneath your car. I remember saying that we do need a level of stability for speed. We do need a level of institutionalization for innovation. It's just that we also need to have a culture that ensures that institutionalization supports rather than strangulates innovation, right? So bear that at the back of mind. You may be at different levels. If you're listening to me and your organization actually has a lot of structure, and your challenge is how does this structure unleash innovation? How does this structure unleash creativity? And one simple thing to think about is that it's time to begin to build innovation into your structure, right? And one way is to have roles, like I hinted last week, to have units, an innovation unit, to have roles with responsibility for that innovation, for creativity. So once you can build, remember, structure means that you are allocating specific responsibilities to specific roles, and those roles are well defined, well articulated, and even though you have star performers from time to time, as much as possible, whatever makes them star performers is codified such that it is built back into the structure. If there are certain things that made them perform excellently well, you should attempt to, define those competencies, identify those competencies, articulate those competencies, and build it back into the role, right? I remember many years ago, this was maybe 19 years ago, I remember being in a role and I was enjoying myself, and after a while I stepped out of the role. Somebody else took over that role. I didn't quite like what I was seeing. I remember speaking to a Belgian boss of mine. I said, "What happened?" He said, and he looked at me and said, "That was not the role, that was you." And I was surprised because I thought that was the role. Now, this was 19 years ago. Maybe now I would have, made more suggestions as to what could have been done, as to what could have been done to codify whatever it was that, made that role stand out, in my opinion, at that point. So coming back to the conversation, when you have people who perform very well in particular roles, if you're trying to build a structure, if what they are doing, and this is why we still need leadership, because it is leadership that measures, it is leadership that assesses, it is leadership that stays on top of these things, right? So if you have certain performers now, because remember last week I introduced the concept of agency, because there's always the conversation of where do you draw the line between institutions and individuals? And we've been saying from the beginning of this program, I will keep saying it, that leaders build institutions, no doubt. In other words, you will have individuals who are strong, and that's why they are leaders, right? That's why they demonstrate leadership potential. But they must be strong enough to realize that ultimately their responsibility is to build strong institutions. Truly strong leaders do not build everything around themselves. They build in such a manner that can endure. They build in a manner that can, that can persist. They build in a manner that can replicate itself. And that's the mindset of an institution builder. And that is true leadership, in my opinion. We talked about this a lot in our previous program on the making of a transformational leaders. A truly transformational leader understands that his or her responsibility is to reproduce other transformational leaders and also imbue in them the orientation that they must equally raise other leaders. So if you are a truly great leader, if you are a truly wonderful performer, if you are, especially at the leadership level, right? When you are performing in certain ways that are exceptional, you must attempt to codify what makes that performance exceptional. And you must, try to institutionalize it. One, by defining those competencies, by defining even the metrics, right? By codifying the performance. Imagine that you're writing a code, right? You're trying to codify it. And when you can codify it, it now becomes easier to replicate it, one, either through recruitment or through learning and development, or even through simple performance management. And that's another critical point that I want to talk about beyond the structure. One of the things that helps to build institutions is performance management. And that's where you don't just have it as a chart. You don't just have an organizational structure as a document, but you're actually translating it into a way of life, into the organizational culture. Of course, culture, as they say, is the shadow of the leader. To begin with, leaders must model these behaviors, right? You do not have the right to demand the behavior if you are not, first of all, modeling the behavior. So leaders, first of all, must model the behavior. Then, having modeled the behavior, they must go ahead to, replicate that capacity by, first of all, defining it. Yes, you define it in the job description. You update the job description. You define it in the competencies that are, written into the job description. And then you must also learn to build performance goals around it. This is very, very important, especially when you are trying to, move them from learning to performance. Very, very important. You can train, you can do all of that, but if you really want to get it to become a way of life, you must then begin to demand it as performance goals. Performance goals. Of course, you are supporting them. Like I said, you're moving them from learning to performance. So you have attempted to train them on it. And you are also providing ongoing support. Very, very important. Ongoing support. You are guiding, you are coaching. Very, very important. Where necessary, you are mentoring. And you may want to ask, Tolu, what's the difference between coaching and mentoring? Coaching is typically work-related. Mentoring is all of life. You are building the whole individual. That's mentoring. But typically when it's coaching, it's more or less focused only on the job, or mainly on the job. So don't forget, we've talked about structure, we've talked about job description, job delineation, interdependence of roles, not codependence, where only one person is thinking and nobody else is allowed to, contribute optimally. With interdependence, you have everyone performing optimally. They can contribute, they understand their roles, they understand the key responsibilities that their job descriptions capture, are responsible. However, beyond that, they also can contribute. You also have, a team spirit. That's where the culture comes in. A team spirit where they can give feedback, they can receive feedback. There is an atmosphere of psychological safety where they feel confident enough to share their thoughts, to share their feedback, to even share the areas where they do not necessarily agree with the people in the leadership position, right? They feel that safe, that psychologically safe to share their thoughts. My name is still Tolu Omodara. This is Succession Management and Institution Building. We have been looking a little bit deeper into the question of what are institutions. We've tried to answer the question of what is succession management. We've tried to look at institutions. We've described institutions as organizations with enduring capacity, organizations that can outlast the visionary. We've talked about institutions as organizations with staying power. And we've said that one of the things that gives such organizations this staying power is structure. And structure begins with clear delineation of roles. One of the foundational elements of structure is that you have clearly defined roles, such that regardless of the individual who is presently occupying the position, you can always expect a certain minimum standard of performance. Why? Because those things are clearly spelled out, very well delineated, explicitly articulated, right? Such that even if you have a star performer as a leader, you are quick to codify whatever it is that makes that person perform excellently well, such that when the next person takes over that role, you are either ensuring that you look out for those things through recruitment, or you build those capabilities into the person through learning and development. And very, very importantly, you are also using performance management to maintain that culture, to maintain that performance, to maintain that level of standard. Very, very, very important. That way, it does not matter who is in the position, you are sure to guarantee the continuity at the minimum, at the very minimum, the continuity of that level of performance, and ideally to even exceed current best. Very, very important. That's where you have a true institution, when you are exceeding your current best and you are responding to the changing dynamics of the society, as well as your consumers and your customer base, your current and potential customers. So we will soon begin to wrap up today's episode. There are certain things I also want us to, maybe just one thing I want us to look at for this, and then we would go deeper next week. And that's the issue of process, policy and process. Those two things are very important. So we've talked about structure, job description, and so on and so forth. But in having an institution, there are certain things that should also be written as part of the process and the policy. And these things help to, inform the culture and to form the culture. So for instance, if you want to institutionalize excellence, that's more than structure. There's a people element of it, but there's also a process to that. This is how we do things. If we're trying to produce this particular product, we go from this to this point to that point, and you lay out the process. And that's still part of structure. That is still part of ensuring that certain things have structure. So I've talked about the job description part of it, and I'm also talking about the process part of it. Very important, well articulated, well laid. As a matter of fact, it is important for your people to consult those policies and those processes from time to time to guarantee excellence. Very, very important. You do not want to overlook those things. It is also important for those processes to be reviewed periodically. As a matter of fact, part of your process must be reviewing your process. And I know that sounds tautological. I mean, that's just a joke, by the way. But the truth of the matter is that you must have a process, or you must have a policy that mandates a process review. Very, very important, because that's part of what gives your organization structure. That's part of what ensures that you institutionalize certain things. Now, to institutionalize something, remember, it means that it has staying power. It's not a one-off. It's not that you came across it by chance. If you institutionalize excellence, if it becomes, something that is institutionalized in your organization, we are basically saying that excellence has staying power in your organization. We are simply saying that excellence is not something you came across by chance. You are simply saying that you can guarantee excellence. And guess what? You are saying that it is part of your brand capital. Very, very important. It is part of your brand reputation. when you carry a brand that has institutionalized certain things, people will pay for it. They can, you command competitive edge. People don't even want to know the specifics of certain things. All they want to know is that your name is on it. The name of your organization is on it. The label of your organization is on it, because you have come to institutionalize certain processes. You have come to institutionalize certain standards, because it has, those things have, they have become guaranteed with your name. They have become a sure to come by feature with your name. And that's where you begin to reap the benefits of institutionalization of certain things. So you also want to do that through policies and processes that are not compromised, uncompromisable policies and processes. And they are so strong that even those processes are reviewed from time to time. They're reviewed periodically, whether or not they appear to have mistakes or not. You have a policy that guarantees continual process review. That way, you are sure you can take your brand reputation to the bank. You are sure that your brand capital will continue to command a competitive edge for you, and you are sure that you would have staying power. You are building an institution. You are sure that whatever it is that leaders did well would not end with the leaders. Whatever it is that some star performers did well would not end with the star performers. Whatever it is that, some, individuals, quote and unquote, demonstrated exceptionally, you codify them and you institutionalize them. You more or less trap that. When I say trap, I'm using it in a positive sense now. You make sure you capture, I think that's the better word. You capture that brand, the brand reputation that can be assigned to codifying and institutionalizing such good practices. Well, it's on this note that we're going to call it a day. On today's edition of the program Succession Management and Institution Building, we have been looking at some practical tips, some tools, tips and tools for building institutions, right? Job description is one, processes are another, performance management is another, and all of these, to be honest, still have to be overseen by leadership. It's still the responsibility of leadership to be more or less monitoring, assessing, evaluating, from time to time, the organization, such that all of these positive characteristics are being codified, are being institutionalized, are being defined, and are being, to be honest, as much as possible, are being solidified. This is where we draw a curtain on today's edition of the program. Thank you very, very much for doing this with us. I hope you've been able to learn some very practical things. We are breaking it down very deliberately. We are making it very pragmatic. We want to be sure that these are things that you can understand and you can implement. And guess what? We are always here to support you on the journey as well. You can always reach us at theamoge.org, www.theamoge.org, contact@theamoge.org. We're on Facebook, we're on LinkedIn, we're on Instagram. We look forward to hearing from you, and we're here to support you to institutionalize your good practices, to institutionalize certain elements you are seeing in some star performers or some leaders, to help you build programs, processes, articulate policies that will guarantee that these things have staying power and you build an institution out of your organization. Thank you so much. It's been nice doing this with you. We look forward to being back with you same time, same station next week. Until then, my name remains Tolu Omodayo, and we wish you an institutional focused rest of the year. Thank you.